Hi, my name is Barbara, and I have some paranormal experiences I'd like to share with you. I've been having experiences throughout my entire life. Approximately 20 years ago, I worked in a restaurant in Newtown, Connecticut. Ed and Lorraine Warren, renowned demonologists, were actually regulars at this restaurant, and I got to know them very well. And I had shared, some of my experiences with them. And Lorraine Warren told me that I would have paranormal experiences for the rest of my life, that I had the type of energy that ghosts were attracted to. So she, warned me that, there would be much more to come, and she was right. But I'm going to share with you what's been going on since I've been living in the home that I'm currently living in. I've been here 8 years. It's a colonial home in New Preston, Connecticut. It's situated on the East Aspetuck River. And when I came to view the property with my husband, I felt a strange presence in the home the first time I entered the home. But the house is so picturesque. The views are incredible of the river. Any trepidation that I had over a strange feeling in the house was overridden by my desire to live in such a beautiful home, in such a beautiful place. So we went ahead and we rented the house, and my husband was a non-believer. He did not believe in ghosts. He had never had any, personal experiences, so he just didn't believe. And one night in this house changed his mind. The very first morning in the home, he turned to me at 6 a.m. and said, "I can't believe this, but I think you're right. I think we have a ghost." So I'm going to share with you just a couple of experiences. There's many, many things that have happened in this house, so I'm going to share two. We were dog sitting for a friend of mine's dog, and the dog was here for approximately 2 months. And this dog, his name was Bailey, and he adored me. So he was always by my side. And one night, I woke up to him shaking in the bed, and he was actually trying to crawl under me, which was very strange. He had never done anything like that before. It was as if he was trying to get protection from something. So anyway, I get up, and it had woken my husband up as well. And I take the dog outside, and I opened the door to bring him outside, and the dog took off out of the house and just went in right through my yard into my neighbor's yard. And I quickly followed after him and wound up retrieving him 3 yards over. He would not voluntarily come back with me. I had to pick him up and carry him through the 3 yards. Once I got to my back porch, he wiggled out of my arms and took off running again. It was such strange behavior for this dog. I went back and retrieved him. He was in the same spot, 3 yards over. This time I held on to him tightly when I got to the porch, and we entered the home with him to find my husband trying to disarm the smoke detector in our bedroom. It was ringing, and he had pressed the button to disarm it several times, but it was still ringing. Bailey would not re-enter the bedroom. He was standing in the threshold, shaking and whining and crying. It had become very obvious to me that he didn't want me in this bedroom either. But anyway, so my husband's still trying to disarm the alarm, and it's still ringing. So he takes the batteries out of it, and it's still ringing. So that's a little baffling. Okay, how is this working without batteries? So at that point, he actually rips the wires out of it. And to our astonishment, it was still ringing. We eventually wound up putting it in a drawer under some of my husband's heavy work jeans and stuff, and that muffled the sound, and we were eventually able to fall back asleep. But I should note that Bailey was here for a few more weeks, and he never re-entered our bedroom again. And I'm going to share one more experience. One night, I'm lying in bed, and it's 3 a.m. I'm woken up to the sound of footsteps walking back and forth on my side of the bed. I kind of reached over, and I could feel my husband's laying next to me, and we're the only two in the house, so it was quite frightening. For 20 minutes, I lay there listening to footsteps walk back and forth on my side of the bed. I refused to open my eyes. I didn't want to see what was there. I really didn't. I just laid there with my eyes tightly shut, and after 20 minutes of this, whatever it was, it growled, and as it growled, the growling sound moved towards the bed as if something were coming at me, growling at me, and that woke my husband up, and he was terrified. I was terrified too, but he was really terrified. That really freaked him out. So anyway, as I had mentioned, we are renters. We don't own. So approximately a year into our being here, the gentleman that owns the house was moving a bunch of furniture out of our basement, a whole house full of furniture. And my husband volunteered to help him load it onto the truck. And, my husband asked him, what, did you have a tenant run off in the middle of the night? Like, where did all this furniture come from? To which the landlord replied, sort of. So my husband said, what do you mean, sort of? And that is when we learned that 6 weeks prior to our renting this place, the gentleman that lived here before us committed suicide in our bedroom.
One of my earlier experiences, it was circa 1965. I was the youngest at around 3 to 4 years old of 7 siblings, and the next one in line was 16. So I was very young at the time, and all of them were older than that, and everybody was still living at home in a farmhouse. Now, apparently I had been put in for a nap during the day, and I guess somebody had put me down to sleep on my parents' bed. And I remember being in the center of the bed and something waking me up. I sat up, I looked, and my parents had these double shutter doors. Everything seems so big when you're little, and they just seemed like they took up the whole wall. But even in the daylight, I could see a light that was coming from kind of under the doors that moved up and started pushing through the shutters. So the light is like peeling through the shutters, and it kept growing, like it was coming out and up at the same time. The light got brighter and brighter as it approached me, and I'm sitting up looking at this right in front of me. I don't know where the other people in the house were, but I just remember looking at this, and it's just getting bigger and brighter, and it's coming towards me, and it's pushing out through the shutters. And it's really odd because I can remember later on in life seeing that in a movie, and it just took me right back. Well, in the center of this really bright light, there started to be an image, and the image grew as the light grew, and it came towards me out of these shutters. And as this image grew, it turned into a face and then basically a head with no body. And it was all very fast, and it just came at me so quickly, and the face that got more image to it, you could see that it had a ponytail, no neck, but you could see the ponytail almost flying behind it, and had this red ribbon. I'll never forget, as I was looking at that, I could tell at the same time it opened its eyes, and where the eyes would be this angry red light. And I've heard that in multiple other ghost stories and reoccurrences of people telling stories or seeing it. I've since learned that it's an anger energy. And it opened its mouth to scream, and no sound came. I heard nothing. I don't remember hearing anything. It just whooshed at me. And I saw this, and I remember the ribbon matching the eyes. That's all I remembered. And as it whooshed towards me, I remember falling backwards, and I was screaming. I could hear myself screaming. And then my sister and my mother ran into the room, and that's all I remember. Now, the odd thing about this is, with all the siblings in my house, one brother and the rest sisters, my father was a World War II veteran, and he was suffering from what they called at that time shell shock, and he had he drank a little bit, and when he came home, I can remember different talks about certain things happening in the house, things being missing or whatever. But with that many people, it's hard to place. But, of course, I was very young. I remember my mom speaking of it later, and you didn't talk about these things around my dad. So what happened was, not long after that, my mom and dad managed splitting up, and the family, being older, all went in different directions. Everybody went on with their lives. And we moved to a different state, my mother and I. So we never really got together for several years for a family reunion, actually many years, excuse me, for a family reunion. And I remember sitting there, and I was much older, and somebody sat. This was the first time we all got together, almost 20 years later. And we're all sitting there, and somebody says, "Does anybody remember the ghost?" Two of my sisters got up and walked out of the room. They weren't having it. It bothered them so much they wouldn't talk about it. And everybody started to recount the fact that you couldn't speak about it in the house. My dad would get very upset and shut everybody up. And everybody started talking about their accounts that they'd had in this farmhouse. And this farmhouse was probably well over 150 years old when we lived in it. It was a farmhouse in New Jersey. And everybody saw the same ghost. But being the fact that they weren't talking a lot about it or spoke to, maybe one sister spoke to another about it, but they kept it quiet, everybody started matching up stories. And I was shocked to hear that everybody was seeing the same guy. Now, there's a second part to this. I know there's not going to be time on this, but there's a second part to this where my sister saw a ghost or something in her room. She was the oldest one, and we talked about it at the reunion. She was the oldest one, and she was screaming. I remember everybody waking up when we were back there, and she's screaming, "There's a man in my room, there's a man in my room." She's got the door locked, and she had worked on a report for high school, and you'd type it on those old typewriters. They used to pass it around, like the old push-button ones. And everybody worked real hard and took good care of their homework because it was so hard to do back then. And she had it all on top of her dresser, and she had a jar of Noxema sitting next to her because all my sisters used that before they went to sleep. It was a big deal. My sister's in her room. She was the only one in the farmhouse who had her own room. She was the oldest girl. She always locked her door, and it was these big, heavy farmhouse doors. The farmhouse was about 150 years old, and this was again in 1965-ish. Everybody heard her screaming, "There's a man in the room, there's a man in my room." And everybody got up and scrambled. We were, unfortunately, very used to my dad getting, he would have these problems from being a World War II veteran, and he would have these memories, and they would cause him to go up, especially when he drank, and there was always seemed to be some kind of unfortunate ruckus going on. So this was something that happened, unfortunately, quite a bit. So I remember there was a lot of scrambling going on, and everybody running down the stairs, and people just, talking about 9 people in a hallway at one time just bumping into each other and trying to figure out what's going on. My sister's screaming. My brother and my father are banging on the door, telling her to unlock the door, and she's just screaming. And like I said, these are big, heavy doors. Finally, she got up and she opened it. I saw her jump back on the bed, pull the covers up over her, and everybody just rushed in. I was held back. I was with my another sister, and all the talking that was going on. Now, she had, done her homework and put it up on this high dresser, one of those dressers that had 6 drawers and it was a little high with a mirror above it. She had her homework there with a jar of Noxema when she put me to bed. And it seemed at the time, when everybody just got done running around, they opened the door, and I see that Noxema was spread all over. It's a heavy white cream, if you don't know what that is, face cream. It's spread all over the mirror with great big handprint, and all her homework is tore up. Now, my father's yelling and screaming, and he's saying that there's, what's going on here? What'd you do? There's lots of different screaming and yelling. My brother goes to the window to look, and the window is shut. Now, there had been snow that night. It was in the wintertime in Jackson, New Jersey, and it was very cold. And they took a flashlight, and they went outside, and they looked, and there's no footprints in the snow. It was on the second, or I would say probably the second floor, and maybe the third. I honestly can't remember because there was a little part that was up high, and it may have been that one. But either way, no footprints in the snow. Nobody could have got up. The window was shut. And there's all this stuff, and the handprint on the mirror was bigger than hers. Now, later on, when we had the family reunion, another sister had started telling the story because my sister had confided in her and spoke about what the man looked like. And yes, he was a Revolutionary War type uniform with a ponytail with a red ribbon in his ponytail. And that shocked me. That just brought me back when I heard that, because that's what I had seen at 3 years old.
When I was between 3 and 8 years old, I lived in a big old house near the river in a small town in Argentina. It was a one-story house, and for context, the bedroom area was on the complete opposite side of the house from the kitchen and living area. In between the two, there was a huge living room and dining room. The bedroom area was separated by a door that led to a long corridor, with my bedroom being the one furthest from that door. Every night, my dad would lock that door and take the key with him to his room. I was not an easily scared kid. Well, not until I turned 7, and my sister scared me to the point of sleeping with the lights on. But back to the point. I used to sleep in pitch black darkness. I never felt scared or creeped out by the dark, probably because I was so young and didn't know what to be afraid of at the time. Also, for context, ever since I can remember, I've woken up at 3 a.m. on the dot to take a bathroom break. I have no idea why, but my brain always seems to wake me up at that time. Now back to the story. I always remember that in that house, every night when I would wake up, I would hear noises in the kitchen. Just thinking about it now makes my eyes tear up. I used to hear sounds as if someone was moving things around, opening cabinets, and clashing plates. I also remember hearing very distinct footsteps. In my young, innocent mind, I thought my mom was probably cleaning dishes in the kitchen because it really sounded like she was, just like she did during the day. It always puzzled me, though, why my mom would be in the kitchen at that hour, but I brushed it off. Clearly, she wasn't there and was always sound asleep in her room. This happened almost, if not every night, that I woke up. I only remember one occasion when I tried to go to the kitchen to see what was going on. Like usual, I went to the toilet, and as I got out, I decided to go to the kitchen to get some water, since I never liked the taste of the water from the bathroom sink. I assumed my mom was in the kitchen because I could clearly hear the sounds of what I thought was her cleaning dishes. I walked to the corridor door, and as soon as I tried the handle, I realized it was still locked. Trying to open it made that distinct clacking sound of a locked door, and with that sound, everything in the kitchen suddenly stopped. I was baffled, but decided to go back to my room and sleep. I think about these sounds a lot because, to be honest, they were a big part of my childhood. And to be even more honest, I continued hearing them until I was 10, even after moving to a completely different house. The only difference was that in the new house, since I was older and more scared than when I was a small child, I was completely terrified of even getting close to the kitchen at night. I have always had strange experiences throughout my life, many of them far scarier than this one, but this memory always comes back to me as something I've never been able to explain or understand. I was a senior in high school, and one of my cheer teammates invited the whole team over to celebrate her birthday. I didn't know it at the time, but she had a Ouija board. She brought it out, and I said, "Nope, not a good idea." I found out that her grandma had just died, and she was really torn up about it. I was very adamant that this wasn't a good idea, and that we didn't know if what we were talking to would be her grandma or not. She promised me she'd just try it twice, and then put it away. By this time, I knew a lot more than I did back during my first experience. I told her that she must say goodbye each time the girls rotated, and I had them put salt around the board to keep whatever they were talking to inside the board, and so no one would or could get possessed. They tried it at least 4 times with different girls each time, and the planchette didn't move even once. They all laughed at me for how scared I acted earlier, saying that the board was stupid and doesn't actually work. I got kind of annoyed because some of them knew about my experience. I had shared it with the few who were already hesitant about the board when it was brought out. I said, "You know what? I'll do it, and I'll prove to everyone here that these boards are real." It was me, the birthday girl, who was a class below me, and 2 other girls from my class who only joined the team for our senior year. We put our fingers on the planchette and did the 3 circles to begin. I asked who we were talking to, and the planchette moved for the first time that night. The 2 girls in my class were huge skeptics. They said, of course, it would move when I just said I'd prove it's real. They accused me of moving it, but the information that came out was information I never knew until they connected the dots for me. The board first went to the letter J, then to the letter R. We were all confused because JR wasn't a name or a name of anyone we knew, or so we thought. We then asked why they were here, and the board spelled friend. We asked again who this was, and the board spelled JR. We then asked what J stood for, and the board spelled out JONAT. One of the girls from my class screamed, "No way!" We all looked at her in confusion. She asked, "Is this Jonathan Rahman?" The planchette immediately moved to yes. The 2 girls sat so quietly, and we just waited. The birthday girl asked who JR was, and the girl started to explain. JR was a guy who was in the class above me. I knew of him, but nothing about him personally. I had been cheering at our school all 4 years, so I knew him from the football team. That was about all I knew of him. He had passed away during our sophomore year, his junior year, due to his car's exhaust. He didn't want to wake his parents after driving home from a party in the middle of winter, so he slept in his car with the car on in the garage. His parents found him the next morning. I remember it totally tore apart his class. His friends didn't show up to school for at least 2 weeks out of grief, and we had a big celebration on the football field in the spring. Back to the Ouija board situation, the 2 girls in my class were panicked. They looked at me weirdly, and I said, "Well, it must be him coming through." They said no, that it's impossible because the board doesn't work, and that I'm making all this up and moving the planchette. They said I was a horrible person for impersonating JR, and I said I wasn't because I truly wasn't. I said, let's keep going and see what comes up. I knew they were friends of his and could validate the information that came through. They reluctantly agreed and feverishly asked a few more questions. They asked what his football number was. The planchette moved to 2 numbers, and the 2 girls were in shock. I looked at them questioningly because, again, I didn't know this about him. It had been 2 years since he passed, and I had no idea what his number was. I couldn't even remember which number the assigned player I had a few months before had. Then, they asked what color car he had. The board answered red, which was true. I at least remember the picture they had for his celebration was him and his red car because he loved the car. They then asked who his best friend was, and I definitely had 0 idea who that would be. Again, we had similar friends. We were at the same places at the same time occasionally, but I never once spoke to this guy, and our mutuals didn't really talk to me about him because we didn't have anything in common other than friends and the football cheerleader type of association. The board spelled out his best friend's name. The guy was the only person in our school with that first name, but we asked for the last name just to see if it would spell it correctly. And it did. The girls didn't even say goodbye. They flung the board at me. They called me a liar, saying I made all of this up. They were sobbing and screaming at me, which made me so uncomfortable. I was nothing but the tuner, the instrument that opened the veil for them, and they thought I was an awful person. The whole team fell silent, and I just left due to the discomfort. Even though I'd been captain of our team and had cheered with the majority of those girls for at least 3 years, the majority of them didn't talk to me, even at practice. for at least 2 weeks. So many of them thought I was either crazy or disgusting. Only a few of them understood that I wouldn't have known that based on who I was friends with at school and who I actually hung out with. JR and I never truly crossed paths for conversation until that night. If it was actually him, that is. I think it was, but I do know that spirits can pretend to be someone and read our thoughts and memories with them. I used to clean a building that once upon a time was an insane asylum, and is now a place where children go if they have learning difficulties. The building was opened in the 1820s as a mental hospital. I find it funny that they called them hospitals when they would treat homosexuality with electric shock therapy. But regardless, it stayed open until 1853. It then became a psychiatric facility until about 1985, when it was closed down and became what it is in its present day. The creepiest thing was that you would walk in and stand in the corridor with the cells, now offices, all along the wall straight in front of you. The floor was wooden and battered through the years of hard use. The offices were cells with desks and computers in them. Not a single thing had changed. The doors were thick, solid, and heavy, with a metal peephole cut in the middle. A heavy iron inlay was in the corner of every room with a hoop attached. It served as a horrible reminder of when people were tied up, fearing their treatment would drive them to madness, if they weren't already. I would first like to say that I'm 6'2" and have studied mixed martial arts for a number of years, so I know I can take care of myself, but in some of those offices I would be shaking. Not because I saw any shadow people, but I could feel something dark crawling at the inside of my head, screaming, just scraping away at my sanity with every blood-curdling scream. This wasn't out loud, but inside my head. I would clean the place up and be out of there, like you wouldn't believe. So I would go into the next room, feel almost sad, and just be at a loss with everything I was feeling. So much empathy for something I couldn't see. It was the strangest thing. Then we got to where we were now, the women's toilets. I felt so sick walking into that room. Chills would run up my spine and shake me to my core. It was so cold. I'm a fairly big guy, and whatever was in there intimidated me and belittled me. I could feel a horrible lurking presence everywhere I was in that room. Something so aggressive and angry at the world. Even my old man would hate being in there, even if it was just for a minute or two. There were so many emotions in that building that you would walk out feeling drained. Feelings are all well and good, but that's all they are. You can't really base things on that. This is where my story takes a bit of a twist. My dad and I would do this particular job at around 1 to 2 a.m., nice and dark by then. And being a father and son, it was our duty to scare each other by jumping out from a corner or something along those lines. We walked in, and I was feeling brave and stupid, so I shouted, "I want to play tonight, boys and girls. You must be in need of some entertainment." "Well," I asked, and "God damn it," they replied. Before we could stumble through the thick darkness, every single monitor in the building came on. My dad was calling me a thick shit. The shutters on the peepholes slid shut in order, starting from the furthest away to the heaviest boot footstep that seemed to hit the floor like a slow stroll. In my mind, it seemed like it was a warden or a doctor doing their nightly checks. Being stubborn and with a job to do, we pretended like we couldn't hear anything and began to carry out our routine. At the end of one of the corridors, there was a large meeting room. A very large room with no windows. Make your own mind up about that one. A big oval-shaped table surrounded by chairs sat in the middle of the room. Now, on this side of the building, the lights were still off. I looked into the room on my way to the switches, which were conveniently placed at the end of the lovely darkness that filled every millimeter. I must apologize if people listening are thinking, he's using a lot of words to describe darkness, but it wasn't just darkness. If you can imagine filling a room with that much negativity and evil, it would be blacker than black, almost like you'd have to wade through it to reach your desired location. So the lights came on after a few butt-clenching moments of flickering, and I noticed that all the chairs were placed on the table. Some were stacked on top of each other. I didn't hear a thing, not a single sound, just pure silence. There was a grand old mirror behind the table, mounted on the wall. This next part scares me so much that even writing it, I can feel tears in my eyes, not out of sadness, but through fear. A man, black as night, completely featureless, my height, his arms crossed, and gentle black mist that seemed to caress his slender figure, came walking out of one of the offices. It was a walk, not crawling along the walls or any exorcist stuff. I could see him in the mirror getting closer and closer, but I just couldn't avert my eyes. I couldn't speak or move. I just found myself standing there, hopeless, with a pole from Henry Hoover in my hand. I could feel that screaming in my head again. And as it was filling with those blood-curdling screams, shaking me to my core, I was so angry. If my dad had walked into the room I was in, I would have ripped his heart out. A cold, pure rage ran through my veins. The more I stared into that mirror, I stopped seeing that thing behind me and diverted my eyes back to my own reflection. I was Snow White. My eyes, which are green, were now black. The whites of my eyes were so bloodshot I looked like Satan himself. I shouted so hard and loud, all I could taste was blood. My dad came running down the corridor, completely unaware. He ran over to me as I dropped to my knees from exhaustion. He pulled me out of there like he was going through his basic training again. We left our equipment and all the lights on, locked the door, and my dad collected it the next day in the early afternoon. As for me, I slept for 2 days and 2 nights, waking up for 30 minutes here and there to eat and use the throne. I've never gone back to that hellish place, and I never intend to.